one of our sponsors, but we send them love and props as well. So, you guys know who they are, right? I don't have to say anything else but welcome Duo Demonology.
Well, if you don't know who we are, my name is James Zanito, and that's Carl Johnson. We have a combined experience of 60 plus years in the paranormal field. We run a group called Duo Demonology. There is actually a trio member to it, and Alicia Marco Carlson, who's not here. She's our historian, manager, and also a parapsychology researcher that goes to the Ryan Institute. But who we are, Duo Demonology. Duo Demonology is a research and a lecture group that coincides, comes together, helps individuals, but also tries to eat away from the misconceptions of demonology. Demons are very fascinating things. You see it on television, on movies, some of the grandest movies that we watch, like The Conjuring, Insidious, Paranormal Activity itself, all linger upon demons. But is it as pungent, as daily as people expect it to be? Well, it's not, and that's what Duo Demonology is here for. We take 48 years of Carl's experience, and we take the 15 going on 16 years of my experience of dealing with demonic cases, and of course Carl's first ever case being the Conjuring house in 1973 in Harrisville, Rhode Island. So, there's a lot of experience that Duo Demonology looks at to tackle their cases. We usually do lecture, but today we'll probably open it to a question and answering, and we'll linger on a few things because, everybody has a question. What is a demon? How many cases have you done? Hopefully, of course, if you ask that question, we'll answer it. But there are deep things that we can dig into with the questions about demons. And there's many people that talk about this topic, but there's not many people like Carl and I. We had the pleasure of speaking at the Warrens event this past weekend as of course with Keith, the three demonologists that were there. And that's a proud moment because we're respected and we're looked at upon as those specialists. We're not always right, but we can come up with the best conclusion that we have seen through the cases we've done. And I'll tip it over to Carl so I don't linger too much. Hopefully he does not sing. If you do, put your earmuffs on.
Well, I'm muted anyway with a mask, so I guess that's okay. What did I do? I started off at the Warren Secrets of the Supernatural. That's why we were talking a second, testing the mic. Then I turned it into a heartbeat. Then I had a little beat going on. Sherry, Sherry baby, Sherry, Sherry baby, Sherry baby, Sherry baby, Sherry, won't you come out tonight? Come out tonight. But I did the whole song for them, so. Thank you.
Now we're duo duet.
Duo duet? Yes, we are. Yeah, we are very thankful to be here, and grateful that you've invited us. And quite a harrowing ride at times. Like nobody likes their lane, so they're going to shift without giving any directional. And I don't know. James was meditating though. He puts himself in a calm state where he can concentrate, and he keeps chanting and chanting. What is that chant? What is that? A Vedic word you use? What is dickweed?
I never said that.
No, he said other things anyway. Yes. But serious now, as James was saying, there aren't always answers. There are a lot more questions in the field of the paranormal research and demonology in particular than there are answers because we're dealing with basically the unknown, but the supposed, We think there are invisible beings that are somewhat involved with our race, as the human race, and interested in us. Now, are they ultra-terrestrials? Are they extraterrestrials? Did they come from heaven in the Great Fall, the Great Rebellion, and now they're in subterranean caverns? Or are they just all around us? We don't know. but there is evidence that there are supernatural beings in our presence, and they influence us to some degree. So as James said, we're going to really begin with questions and answers, and we'll see how that goes. If there's enough momentum, we'll keep that going. Does anybody have a question about our field, our particular research? And let me just say that we define demonology as the systemized study of the lore and cultural traditions of wicked spirits. As simple as that. But we are applied demonologists. There are academic and applied demonologists. Academic is, somebody who does a study of demons. Doesn't necessarily have to be clergy, but scholastic pursuits. An applied demonologist will go out into the field or address cases and consult and be consulted. So we try to incorporate both. So any questions from our lovely audience? Yeah. Pathway to becoming demonologist. Well,
time at band camp. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it probably commenced when I met Ed and Lorraine Warren at Rhode Island College. That was April 17th, 1972. And Ed did some audience participation. He asked questions. I raised my hands twice to his questions, and he said, "Come up here, young man." So I became part of the lecture and got to know the Warrens quite well in the ensuing months. So I would say that was the start. But I remember being out in that audience, hearing Ed and Lorraine speak. And to know Ed and Lorraine, they were just charming. Now, you can debate their methods. I don't agree with all their methodology. But to know them, if you've seen the movie The Conjuring, where they show Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson, respectively, as Lorraine and Ed Warren, that was like looking at the Warrens. That's how they were. And I remember listening to them and saying, that's what I want to be when I grow up. I was 17 at the time. And so our first residential case, cut a long story, was the Perrin family in Harrisville, Connecticut. 40 years later, that would become the subject of a major motion picture called The Conjuring, and we brought Ed and Lorraine Warren into that case. That's how it really happened. It's not that we felt as a team we were in over our heads, our team from Rhode Island College. We just thought it would be a nice touch to benefit from the vast experience of Ed and Lorraine Warren. They ended up kind of taking over the case, which we didn't expect, but it was still an interesting experience. Then 3 years later, my second residential case turned out to be a case of full-blown demonic possession. I don't know what else to call it, no clinical terminology for that. And, I kept getting called into these darker cases that the paranormal groups did not want to handle. So, okay, I guess it's training on the job. Why am I an expert all of a sudden? But I learned as I went along, and that first demonic case was truly horrendous. I'll have to tell you about it sometime, maybe today. And then somebody brought a magazine article to my attention. They said, "Hey, Carl, look, they mention you in this article." I don't remember which magazine it was. I was talked about on David Susskind, who was then, he was before Phil Donahue and before Maury Povich and, all those guys. But therefore, they wrote a magazine article with me mentioned in it. I had about a paragraph, and it said, "Carl Johnson, the Demonologist from Rhode Island." And I said, "Well, demonologist, okay, it has a ring to it. All right, I'm a demonologist. That's what I'm gonna be." And but that best defines what I do. It also, if you need a seat in a restaurant, you don't want others around you. Just say, I'll start talking with James about demonology. Suddenly, you have this wild berth, this wide berth where people don't really want to sit next to your table. They don't want their children there, but you get invited to more parties that way. But that's actually, I'm using some levity to describe it, but that's basically how I entered the field of demonology, and it required a lot of research. But you see, it wasn't assigned research. It was reading as I went along, so it wasn't that formidable. And since then, I've been a demonologist until somebody tells me I'm not, and convinces me I'm not. That's what I'll be.
Well, simply enough, the reason duodemonology exists is because of this man. I was the brainchild, but I could never see anybody else that I could do it with. I'm good friends with John, Ralph, Tony. I'm good friends with a lot of these people and have been friends with them a lot of years as well as he is. And I could approach anybody to do this idea, made it multiple people. But I looked at Carl as somebody that was my mentor. And the way I got into demonology was because of Carl. A lot of people tend to forget Carl and his brother Keith Johnson were labeled on the show Ghost Hunters the first 2 seasons as Demonologist. And of course, there was a book that predates that as well called The Demonologist by Gerald Brittle, written in the perspective of the Warrens. And of course, that's always something that wrapped in my head. I was very agnostic as a child. I did not come across the Conjuring house in my first case ever, nor did I ever have a haunting experience like he did, which is, of course, on a show called Dangerous Games on what? A haunting? So I never grew up any of that. Mine was trauma. I grew up troubled. I grew up questioning God. Why was I put through this? And with those questions, it led me to the paranormal because I loved shows like Unsolved Mysteries, Scooby-Doo. Like everybody laughs, but it's so true because if you look at what their whole quest was on that show, it's the same kind of quest that Carl and I have. We try to disprove, but also help and prove in the same stanza. So growing up in Rhode Island, Cranston, Rhode Island, actually Warwick, Rhode Island. I live in Cranston now. There was of course, a group called TAPS with ghost hunters that existed, and I started watching Carl and Keith. I had respected them. I actually had met Keith first. I was a department manager in electronics department at Walmart, and I actually went to school before the military to get my bachelor's in computer programming. So I was very enthralled with technology. And I started running a group called Ghost, and there's a formula that happened where Carl was working on a case with the people that I kind of became synergetic with and started a group with called Ghost Hunters of Supernatural Truth. Andre Corrier and Stephen Pacheco were on a case called Demon Attack on The Haunted.
Yeah, it was actually documented. It became an episode. It was a legitimate investigation, but it was documented for television. An episode out of it, and that became Demon Attack on The Haunted.
But that group was Rhode Island Paranormal Society, and of course we all know the paranormal field. That group fell apart because of in the turmoil and ego. And so when that group fell apart, our group was created, and I heard Andre was speaking to Carl, and I said, let me speak to Carl. I would love to pick his mind because I've picked Keith's mind over and over again. And he's always asked me about digital recorders and which one was the best and what equipment now can be utilized in paranormal investigation. So, of course, that's a great honor in itself because Keith has the same longevity as Carl does, and I respect both of them. And to cut the story short is basically but in the essence of the story is that Carl and I eventually became very close friends, and he used to run a group called Beyond the Veil Paranormal with Dina Palazzini, and Richard Stacy was a part of this as well, and they were looking for a tech-like oriented person, and he invited me on to be the tech manager for his group. That's not something that you would say no to, especially if you respect what he does. So that was basically the start of me being in demonology. Now, that kind of drive, now I'm ordained in 2 different Christian churches. I was an ordained minister to the Church of Christ, and then eventually later on I became a seminarian with the Catholic Church and then was ordained a deacon. So it's been a kind of rush of different lineages and different trainings, and I think that for Carl, and that's why Carl and I are duo demonology, because there's nobody else that I could think that I could do this with. He gave me the first shot. He gave me so much knowledge. And, 11 years later, as long as we've known each other, we still talk, and now we're on this mission. Next question?
Maybe our answer will be more succinct next time. It won't be a 15-minute answer. Anything about our methodology, what we do, what we've encountered, what we look forward to, what we think demonology is doing for us, and maybe some things that spook us. Make us a little afraid if you want to know anything like that.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm curious about the ties between demonology and Christianity.
Yes.
Other international.
Well, I can be quick on this one. So demonology is a sector of the study of angelology. Demonology is not its own, it's a branch line off of angelology, then which angelology is a branch line off of the study of theology. So that's the path. So, basically, I am a theologian because of my ordinations, but I like to focus on demonology. How about you, Carl? Why demonology?
Why demonology in particular? It just seemed more in depth because the paranormal is very widespread. Paranormal is ghost hunting, paranormal is cryptozoology, ufology, just anything that's apart from the normal. Supernatural means above and beyond what we understand, what is natural. To me, supernatural means impossible. But paranormal is very widespread, and I wanted to center on these darker, malevolent-seeming forces, spirits that seem to have personality to them and are thought to be not quite human. And it's still difficult to define just what a demon is if you embrace a belief in a demon. I know the traditional belief, but that always fascinated me, and I started to become regarded as some kind of authority on it. I mean, how knowledgeable can you be in the unknowable, really? But I know something of the traditions of demons and, how they came to be believed in past millennia, in fact. So it's just always been a fascinating thing to me. Why these evil beings? Are they evil? Do they really have an agenda, against the human race? So, and the more people asked me about it and wanted me to participate in these investigations as a specialist, the more fascinated I became. And I began to establish some commonalities that present the entity as a demon when you go into a situation, an investigation. I still don't have my mind made up about what a demon is, but I have some leading ideas anyway. But it just was always a fascinating thing. It seems so medieval, so antiquated to think of evil spirits. But they are reported continually, and I wanted to think, does demonology have a place in our time? And I believe it does. Our central mission with Demonology is to legitimize demonology as a field of study. Because however you defined it, there are things out there that bother people that come into their homes or infiltrate their lives. And yeah, there's a lot of psychology involved. I tend to think it's all psychological, but that does not mean imaginary. It just means that it originates in the human mind. What's the best place to hide something? In an obvious place out in the open. Well, the human mind is a good place for demons to hide themselves. That sounds kind of spooky, but I don't think demons just come into people's lives for no reason and victimize them. There has to be something that happened. Something went wrong. Something diverted the railroad tracks at some point in the person's past or even their family's history. So it seems more interesting than angelology for some reason. But to be a demonologist, you have to be familiarized with angelology and the whole pantheon. So it kept calling me back. That's why I specialized as a demonologist. Every time I tried to get away from it, or not so much try to, but sometimes it interfered with personal relationships. Why do you have to do this demon stuff? You'd rather be in a graveyard than with me. Oh, well, if you have to do this thing, why demons? Don't talk about them. So actually, I had to put my demonology studies on hold sometimes, and it actually has cost me some interpersonal relationships. But well, I'm not going to stop it. No, but it kept finding me basically. Demonology did. All right. Oh, we had another question about what.
What do y'all do personally when you do encounters that you feel is demonic?
We do? We talk about it first and think, what are we going to do? We develop a strategy, basically, because, you can't predicate a demonic situation on the previous one. You're only as good as your last demonic encounter. So since we're dealing with elements of the human mind and different personalities, we have to adapt to that situation. There are commonalities, things like, I'm being disturbed at night. I wake up and I have scratches on me, that I can't explain. That's one symptom. And I keep getting 3 raps on the walls, and, I can find my furniture is moved around. And James and I have to evaluate and adjudicate and interview. James has come up with a very good questionnaire, to which I've contributed. We ask specific questions, trying to get to the bottom of how did it start? That's what I'm most concerned with. How did this originate? You didn't just wake up and have this disturbance one day, And so what we do is we develop that strategy, say, well, we've got to approach it carefully. Do we actually want to go to see this person? Can we afford to go see this person in Wisconsin? And how much of it is rooted in the home environment? Do they have unsettling occurrences? Are there problems with their children? What are they going through? And, when children are involved, of course, it's a very sensitive issue because children tend to see things that adults don't see anymore. You ever see a dog or a cat watch something walk up the stairs and start to, and they're going like this? They're seeing something, And my nephew, when he wasn't quite, one of my nephews, when he wasn't quite, I think he was 3, he wasn't quite 4 years old. And I was going to a storage unit, I had the kids with me, and my nephew, Sebastian, starts going, "He's here! He's here!" And he's pointing. So what's he saying? And his older brother, Sean, said, "Oh, he has an imaginary friend now." I said, "Oh, okay." And he kept looking over there. And then as we're leaving, he turned around and going, "Bye, bye." He doesn't remember anything about it, but I believe he was seeing someone. And animals, they do that. And sometimes it's very real. I was on a case in Edmond, Oklahoma, 11 years ago now. And we were going around the house recording and surveying the property. When we came back in, they had a miniature Chihuahua. Chihuahuas aren't big anyway, but this one of those little tiny runts. Pogo, his name was. And this was also documented for a television show, but it was already a case. And little Pogo, little black and brown, he's losing his hair strangely. And so with the homeowners, patches were coming out. And so we came back in, me and a couple of members of the investigative team, and the little Chihuahua starts going, and he's shivering, but he doesn't seem to be looking at us. He's, when we played back our audio recording, we hear a little Pogo going, and then this male voice comes out and goes, like it's mocking the dog. Bite me, So sometimes these animals and small children are seeing things. That's one thing to evaluate, take into our calculations.
And just to add on to that, I think it brings a good statistic value to our cases as well. He said see these things. Carl and I, once again, we have been both doing this for quite a while. Carl, 3/4 of it, mostly. But we have only come across, in totality, 10 cases of demonic activity since we've all done this, between the both of us. So,
it sounds like we're doing this all the time, but you space that out over my years and his years. 5 cases we evaluated
each,
as demonic. It doesn't happen that often, but that's what we're here talking about.
So in reality of it, if it's 10 cases, we have had experiences with these things, but like you said, each experience is different. So even if we do come across it, we take it in a total different package because it's a whole new experience. And we've had limited experience. You unfortunately, and I'm not going to judge anybody, but you hear it like it's done on a daily basis for some people. And that's because they don't take an analytical approach to it. They take how we were in the archaic middle and dark ages where, serial killers were werewolves and, people were witches or this person was a vampire. Some people still live in that methodology, ideology, and that's why you hear people bring it up more, or they are misinterpreted what is being presented to them. Because one thing that we tend to forget is we like to use the word intelligent for these things, right? If a human spirit still lingers and it's intelligent and it doesn't want you to bother it, it's going to be proactive in being negative or get away. So it's going to perform or be proactive in doing negative things, especially if it was a bad person in life. Some people mistake that and they jump to the demonic conclusion because, it's because it's pop culture and it's literature, it's in the movies, and people don't realize that's not the whole bubble. It's their reenactments, dramatizations, loosely based on true story. And anytime you hear based on a true story, it's like a small percentage of it's truthful. Just to be honest with you. So you have to understand, anytime you hear that, you have to understand what you're watching. Do we have another question? Yes.
How many, have you had any cases that you've investigated that went beyond infestation, obsession, to actual possession, whether it be place or an individual, and how did you remedy it? Do you guys do the exorcisms, or do you have a designated priest, an exorcist that handles those cases?
Yeah, so I'll definitely limit it. So out of those 5 cases for myself, 2 of them were infestation levels, and I love the word that you use, obsession. A lot of people don't use that word, but it is on the same basis level of oppression. Some people have become obsessive about it, though. Instead of being oppressed and it's this thing that's beating them down, they come to love it and obsessed with it. It's actually more rare than oppression, but people that are very influenced in diabolism tend the ones to be obsessive. People that are into the occult become obsessive with it. So those 2 cases were infestation, oppression, and then those 3 other cases were demonic possession. My first demonic possession case, I was brought in by a psychologist, and it was actually in Salem, Massachusetts. My first demonic possession case was in Salem, Massachusetts, actually right down the road from here.
James gave me a tour on the way in. He said, those are the houses.
Yeah. So it's very rare, but as far as your question, even though I am ordained deacon, I would still call into forth someone as an exorcist, because, yes, technically I do know the ritual, and technically if the host was consecrated, the Eucharist, was consecrated, I could technically perform a deacon's mass and then perform an exorcism, but I would not do so because there are people hell of a lot more trained than Carl or I. I know Carl can tell his story, but no, I try to bring as many people on the boat as possible, because I'm not a psychologist, a psychotherapist. Yes, I have a theology background, and I can do religious consultation. I have my certifications to do so, but that's all I should go for. If somebody needs a psychotherapy like an exorcism, or it's really a spiritual attachment, and I'm going to call somebody that has tenfold years amount of experience than I, because once again, like Carl says, we're dealing with the human mind. And in any of those cases that we dealt with, those 10 cases, trauma in those individuals was predominant. You had to fish for it, but if you did enough of the interview process, it becomes apparent what their issues started from and why it's continuing to this day. So that's part of the process.
Well, I do have a few demonic possession cases that I've logged, and they'd all had some commonalities, and one of them was violent behavior on the part of the subject that was being invaded. But I want to give you 2 perspectives of my first demonic case. I was 21 years of age, and this was in the west end of Providence, the Armory District. Kind of a spooky place anyway. And the subject was a boy at the age of 14, and actually I had another one that was a young lady of the age of 14. It's a transitional time. Well, I'll call this subject Lucas, because that was his name, and that's what I called his name. It was a long time ago. And Lucas was going through some episodes that I at first attributed to dissociative personality disorder combined with epilepsy, because that's what it seemed like. Not that I was any authority. I was 21 years of age. But even then I had a reputation as an investigator who would stand his ground, so I was invited to spend the night there. I had been to Puerto Rico for 4 months. I knew the family, and they were of Puerto Rican descent. This boy was born in New York City, though. And I stayed overnight at this 3-story house in the west end of Providence, Messer Street. And I thought, well, I hope he doesn't have one of his episodes tonight, but we'll just, I'll watch. So it was 1 a.m. I was starting to doze off on a sofa that was adjacent to his bedroom. We were on the 3rd floor. All of a sudden, this ear-splitting scream. It was like he was set on fire. I heard him. I wasn't sure it was him at first. It was such a vigorous scream. I went up, fumbled for the wall switch, turned on the overhead light. Lucas's bedroom door opened about this fast. I had the light on, and it opened up, and his body came spiraling out. How do you describe this? he was spinning on the floor about this fast, and his body was careening against the walls. You could hear the whoosh, 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 and he's screaming all through it. And he's in this fetal position. He's being tossed. Then he starts to crawl on the wall, like do the spider crawl. And what can I do? I'm watching this, I'm transfixed. And then his family came in, alerted by the screaming. He did a backwards flip onto the sofa where I had reclined and started jumping up and down, flapping his hands. And this deep guttural laughter issued from his throat. And he looks at me with this wildness, the ferocity, jumped at me. I caught him in his leap, and I tried to restrain him. He pushed me right off. I was my normal 200 pounds. He just pushed me right off. Then he came to himself, but he was shivering and crying, calling for his uncle, Tony. And, the strategy we came up with was, I think I suggested it, that we would do a rite of expulsion. Not really a rite, but an exercise of expulsion, which is a minor form of exorcism, not so formalized. And it was successful. What happened during that expulsion, what had been going on in that house, is religious pictures and icons were being thrown around, fly off the wall. During the expulsion rite, I call it a rite. It's not really that, but it is somewhat structured, and it has a beginning and an end. The floor shook. It just rumbled as if it was an earth tremor. And then my chair with me in it went back across. I don't know why me, but my chair with me in it went back across the room to the wall. Lucas fell to the floor, went through these gyrations. There was a picture of Jesus on a table, and I was hoping Lucas would look at that and be distracted. So I looked down at it, and less than a minute later, I looked at that picture again. It had inverted itself. It was upside down. So it must have flipped over. If there was a camera playback, you'd see it flip over. This invasive force seemed like it was trying to get into me. I said, wait, no, I'm not prone to this kind of thing. I suddenly felt an onrush of emotion and agitation that was not my own. It was panic and it was rage, and it seemed to be telling me to jump out the window. I just said, no, this is not me. I'm not going to let it get to me. Then I felt that in the back of my head, like pull. And it seemed to go into a young woman in the next room because she fell down and started pulling her hair out. And one thing after the other, objects just going through the air. And then after about close to an hour of this, the boy started approaching. He came towards me with that wild look again. I didn't know what else to do. I held up my hand and said, stop. And he stopped in mid-gate, and I went up and put my hand on his face, and I said, it's going to be all right. It is all right. And after that, he was better. It was actually successful. Now, doesn't that sound very supernatural? How does a boy's body fly out of the room? I mean, how do these pictures come off the wall? As the principle calls psychokinetic force, energy. Now let me give you a more prosaic interpretation of this. The boy was 14 years of age. He's adolescent, establishes his identity. He had picked up a glove in a cemetery in the West End and brought it home with him. And his godmother told him he had to bring it back to the cemetery, and then it was gone. He was Puerto Rican Dominican descent. That culture embraces a belief in spirits, interacting with human living people. His godmother was Santorian. They were raised very Catholic, and they had all the cross and the picture of Jesus and the statue of Mary. Those were the items that were being affected. He had somewhat of a trouble. He wasn't like other children. He eventually developed his own form of expression, which wasn't as popular back then. He was not heterosexual, but he came out of that fine. And a few years later, I asked him, "You remember that time? I've almost forgotten about it. Remember you were going through those fits?" He said, "No." So you don't remember what we did? And not really. Little bits and pieces. I don't really remember it. So that's a good thing. So you have these two different perspectives. You got it's supernatural. That's how it was approached, because that's what worked. You couldn't sit down with him and say, "This is a thing of your mind. You're going to get over it. I know. Let's have an encounter session." That would not have worked with him. The psychodrama of the expulsion did succeed. Everybody paying attention to him. Everybody there to help him. Attention focused on him, then he's better. Not that he made it up, at least not consciously. So you've got all these psychological elements that I realized in retrospect that, yeah, I can see why he got into this. He was into dark movies, scary movies, and all that. This, of course, in 1974, actually, the movie debuted, The Exorcist, and that defined our Occidental Western interpretation of a demon. So if he felt he was possessed, this is how you get possessed, and this is what it does. So I went from thinking, yeah, a lot of supernatural elements there. You just, well, there are things you can't really explain empirically. And I've turned over to thinking, that is so psychologically sound, how he went through this time of possession. And he just did things that were super, preternatural. And there was PK, psychokinetic energy at work, tossing things around. So it's really, it's strange, fascinating, but explainable in the whole spectrum. Okay. Could be a long answer again.
Yeah, so demonology is diverse. Everybody likes to jump to the Christian realm of things, but there's rabbinical demonology. Rabbis tend to have use expulsion rituals or exorcisms on divics and other forms of creatures. Islamic have a certain ritual. Hinduism, which is one of the oldest, if not the oldest modern day religion by 4,400 years old, was actually one of the first ideologies on exorcism. With the Ferber dagger and drawing the entity into the dagger, just like you have all these attachment things now. Everybody loves all this haunted object stuff. But it's really like the start of that idea that is possible, especially drawing that energy into the dagger, stabbing it into the elements or a bowl of rice to disperse it. So when you're dealing with people, you have to deal with their belief system, deal with the way that they handle life, their pathology. So their belief systems play a huge part, especially if there is no belief system, because what do they lean upon when their world comes down? They don't believe in themselves. What is their backdrop? They don't believe in a God. They don't believe in many gods, polytheistic or monotheistic. Then neither. So what do they go to? So if it's somebody that has no belief system, you don't force it down their throat, but you try to make it apparent to them that they need something to linger on, something to empower them, even if it's themselves or an object or something. Yes, even as a person that preaches the Bible, technically, went through the ordinations, I'm not really a Bible pusher, because I really do believe as long as you're doing good, good is all that matters. It's interpreted in the Bible. It's interpreted in many other different scriptures. And if you do good, that's what matters most. So as long as I'm there doing good, if it's something that they really want to draw upon, if they're like, I worked a case with one client was Hindu and one other client was Catholic, but they were married. So I, of course, tackled it the way that I could. I tackled it the Christian way, and then I tried to tackle it the Hindu way, and my perspective and knowledge of that. Yes, I don't believe in a polytheistic ideology like Hinduism. I respect it, but I could tackle it that way. So I don't force my beliefs. I'm lucky, and Carl's lucky enough to know a bunch of people of all different religious backgrounds. So if it's somebody that is Islamic, Jewish, or however, pagan, I try to bring somebody that specialized in their belief systems to deal with them. And I know some people don't like that because they're, you're not a good Christian. Well, it's about helping people. And I'm not going to force my idea of God on them, because if you really study theology and you study people's religions throughout the world, it's really not that different. It's just different names and a different outlook of it. But it's all really the same thing. So that's really what matters, working with them, not having your ego come to the forefront, not your belief systems coming to the forefront. If they want me to do Christian rituals, I'll do it. But also what's a part of the puzzle, and this is why a man named Hippocrates performed exorcisms on people. He's the father of medicine, so he even seen it as a form of psychotherapy. So there is always, he said, like a psychodrama. There's always some form of psychotherapy involved in a case, because if you're doing something they don't believe in or don't don't agree with, it's not going to work. You know, it's like you go into church and you bring in the Holy Spirit within you. If you don't believe in it, is it going to work? So it's in the same idea. They have to be in the same nature of your opinion or your belief system for that to kind of digest with them. And you have to be upfront with them. If I do this, do you believe in it? And if they say no, what do you believe in? So you got to work with them. That's working with the person.
I could add a little bit to that, like in the case of Lucas, again, just to expand on that. He had a lot of issues going on at the ages, 12, 13, and 14, and didn't seem to fit in at school and all that. He had, some friends and all, but his problems adapting to, societal structures, going through a time where he's saying, who am I, what do I want to be, maybe some tension at home. And then these episodes he was enduring, put that all together and it became personified. It became something that we could tackle. It became the demon. It became the possession. Conglomeration of these factors. Suddenly give it a name, give it a personality, and we can address that. We can recognize that. That's a demon. That's what's after him. Get rid of the demon, his problems are gone. And it actually worked that way. I mean, he had to, establish his own identity, his own sense of self. But during that crucial time, he had me. He had the people who believed that this could work. And it succeeded because we divided ourselves from it. There's the demon, there's the boy. It's two different things. Get rid of the demon, he'll be all right, We could sit and talk with him like I could have talked with him as I am now. But what would it have done if I couldn't convince a 14-year-old boy that something was happening, some transitional phase was at the core of the problem, was the problem. So there's still a need for the witch doctor. Anybody else?
Another question? That's a good one. So you can use religious iconography. I think he has the cross on him right now. Mine's in my keychain right now because I forgot to put my cross on. But I think any religious iconography, depending on your belief system, is a tool of power, an amulet, a talisman, the oldest use of words of it. But that's also not, of course, the end-all, be-all. Being in the Army, I've lost battle buddies, with the first month. They went over, they got hit by an IED. They were in armor-piercing trucks, armored trucks that could take, armor-piercing rounds. They wear bulletproof armor. The truck hits it and they still blow up and they lose their lives. And the same concept, they're in a gunfight, they wear body armor, they still can die. So it's in the same, not as morbid, but it's in the same correspondence as if you're wearing something, it doesn't mean that you're protected. You have to believe in the object you're wearing. You have to have a good head on your shoulders. You have to have a good heart. There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. Everybody wants just to wear an object and I'm untouchable, I'm God, no demons. But that's not how it works. It's not magic. Everybody thinks we come in there with spirit fingers and it's gone, but it's just not that current. So you can wear the object, but the object has to have utilization in your mind that it is there for a reason. What I do specifically, yes, I do wear those objects and I have a good head on my shoulders, but before a case, I like to play music. I like to come up with a game plan. Why am I doing this? What is the cause? What is the moment? Who am I helping? I go through all this stuff. So there's a lot, especially when we're doing this with what I specifically do. I know Carl has structure as well with what he does, but there's a lot to it. It's just not throwing an object on or doing some sage and then you're fine. There's a lot of elements to it, and a lot of it starts with your brain and your faith. Because if you're in the wrong place, the wrong time, if it can affect you. If you're going through private things, you shouldn't go give advice to somebody when you're dealing with specific issues of yourself. How can you give advice if you're dealing with issues yourself? So you have to command and take care of your issues. Then that's when you can go aid and help other people. I think another good thing too is laughter. We're very comedic, and I like to make a lot of clients laugh when I'm at their house, and it helps me as well because it raises my vibrations, raises everybody's vibrations. But when I go to somebody's house and I see them sorrowed and dreadful that they're in their location, I don't want to see that frown. I want to see a smile, and I know it's hard to make that happen, but those are things I do. I try to make people laugh, and that helps, of course, my ambiance as well.
Yes, laughter is a good remedy. If you can bring laughter into such a serious situation as demonic oppression or even possession, that's a bomb. As far as relying on objects, I wear this because it's very precious to me. Somebody dear to me gave it to me, and I like the feel of it. But I lose things terribly. I'm about the worst. Now, I could be putting this on, and, it could go down the bathroom drain, ding, 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 ding. Oh, no. That's going to, bump my confidence. Then I'd be saying, James, I don't think I can join you tonight. I think you're going to have to go it alone. But I don't want to be in that position, so, I wouldn't rely on something. I would be bummed if I was going to wear this and forgot it, because I think it's impressive. But laughter, I went to that case in Edmond, Oklahoma, a different one. The first one was actually not Edmond. It was El Dorado. That's how they pronounce it, El Dorado, Oklahoma, near the Texas border. That was another case just a couple of years later. No, a year later, actually, in Edmond, Oklahoma. That was another case of possession. And it was filmed, it was documented by the television station. And I was warned, they said, this is not going to be an easy one at all, because this girl, this young woman dreads you. I talked to her mother on the phone, and she didn't know who her mother was talking to. She said, that's the chastiser. You're talking to the chastiser. So everybody was kind of apprehensive. What are we going to experience down there? So this is Paul over it. So I sat at the kitchen table. They were a very musical family. And I met the mother and father, and Danny and Susan. But their daughter, Taliesin, soon as we didn't know what was going to happen. What eyes this young lady has. She was glaring at me, watching without blinking, watching every move I made. I said, okay, I know where I am now. So we sat down on the kitchen table, and Taliesin is sitting there. She won't take her eyes off of me. And I said something like, one good thing is the hairstyle and everything I said about her father, Danny, I said, I didn't expect to be able to sit down to dinner with Neil Young here, because he looked like Neil Young and everybody could see it, the straight hair. And I didn't expect to sit down and break bread with Neil Young tonight, And so Taliesin's looking at me, and she goes, then finally she speaks to me. She goes, are you a priest? And I said, no, I just play one on TV. And that just broke the ice. And she didn't laugh at the time, but eventually she did kind of warm up to me, and I got her to laugh a few times. So we just, became a friendly atmosphere. And then, because it was a television show, we had to do interviews afterwards and, basically be ourselves and tell our experiences. And she was like, I'm nervous about this. I don't know. I've never been on television. I said, you know what? You're a musical. The show actually ends with you guys doing a musical set, at home. I think you're going to get some offers after this. People are going to want you to perform for them. And they did. So that eased after a while. But there were horrendous moments to that. But laughter, if you can interject some levity, not dumb comment. Well, my singing is kind of dumb. But if you can interject some light, some good fellowship, some humor, some nice conversation, convivial around the dinner table, it really makes a difference that you can actually do that. And we can.
And I just want to follow up. I know it wasn't part of the direction of the question, but what's also important, too, is specifically when we're sitting down with the individual, yes, we have a questionnaire form, and we go upon some basis of the supernatural. But also our big point is to not make it all about the supernatural. We want to pull them out of that element, because if they're lingering on that repetitively and continuously, and that it's just going to be a driving force for this thing to linger. We want to separate from them from that. So laughter is a separation tactic to get them away from thinking of the ghost, or did you hear that bump? Was it a demon? Because that's what their mind, when they're living with it continuously, the littlest thing, a little pin drop could be the demon. So it is important for us to kind of take them out of that spiritual realm, that supernatural realm. And there's an answer for that. There's an answer for this. Use your strength and not ask questions, because questions are invitational. Make a statement and then let it be.
How grim was that in the end? Just for a moment.
Yeah, of course.
Remember The Exorcist? I assume you've all seen the Conjuring. I hope so. Did you see The Exorcist? All those sense, you know. That's a pretty grim scenario because Father Merrin gets out of the taxi and he's, you know, in the fog and he's got his satchel with him. Lancaster Merrin, the older priest, and he goes to Chris McNeil's door and he goes, "Mrs. McNeil, I'm Father Merrin," and you hear the demon upstairs, "Merrin!" It's grim, and you know there's no lightness, no humor in that, but it's effective for a movie. But that's encapsulating a longer story. It's based on a real story, but it's encapsulating the longer story that you read in the novel. So they're all serious and all dramatic import from the moment the Exorcist arrives. You run out, we'll start asking you questions. Yeah, we can do. You have a question? What's your question?
Well, we do a lot of, investigations, and I encounter a lot of people that have things going on in their houses or wherever. And the first thing their mind always goes to is it's a demon. How do you, what's any advice that you have that you would tell people not everything's a demon? Because everybody goes to, if it's negative, it's a demon. Especially where we're from, Alabama.
Oh, Alabama! Oh, yeah.
And everything's an angel, it's good, or it's a demon. Everything's a demon.
Oh, I wish I was in the land of demons. That is what it's really seeming. Look away, look away. But
Why do you tell people
that you've nailed it, actually, because we hear that so much time. It's the self-diagnosis where folks say, "I have a demon," because that's what's been inculcated. That's what they've experienced. They don't know how else to interpret it, and if it's bothering them a lot, if it's inconvenient, then it's demonic. And we have to untie that knot and explain. But some people insist, no, it's a demon.
That's what, they're just...
Which makes us wonder, what do they expect from us, because however sincere they may be, because that's not really our job to, some people think we're the paranormal paramedics. They've got a demon, they know it, so we're going to come in and drive it out and solve that. And there's really not a good formula for doing that. It just depends on who the people are. But yeah, you just deal with it on an individual level and know that that is prevalent now. And a lot of people are going to say, "I have a demon, you need to help me,
Yeah, it's just
And then it's like, well, let's talk. All I say, we have to talk about this. First thing is like, how do you know it's a demon? But, and then they have to explain what's happening to them. If somebody's waking up with scratches, and most of them have felines too, I find out. But if somebody's waking up with unexplained scratches, being awoken in the night, they feel some pressure on them, like something was holding them down, then automatically they have the demon, and it's really not that simple. So we have to, if, they want to continue with us, we have to try and untie that knot and say it's not necessarily demonic.
And I like to make a big point with WebMD, right? Everybody likes to have the common cold and search online. Oh, what is wrong with me? Oh, I have cancer. But they go to doctor, so it was a cold. But it's like the paranormal and WebMD, for a lot of people. But the generalization of people that approach us all the time, I always say, and this is, of course, hit or miss, I guess, but I like the standpoint. I like to stand by it. I say 90% of the people that approach us and they utter the words, "I am possessed" or dealing with a demon, 90% of the time they're probably not, to be honest with you, because truthfully, a possessed individual will not know that they are under a fit of possession. It's parasitical, it's deceptive. The family will start seeing the change within the individual, and usually the family or friend will seek out the guidance of help, because that person that's being afflicted, especially if it gets to the possession stage, the invitation already occurred. Their free will has already been demoralized, and the entity is able to kind of enter in due to some form of trauma. But usually, most of the time, if we get, "Oh, I'm possessed" or "I'm dealing with a demon," good chance it's likely not.
But our shingle says demonologist, so that's what we're going to encounter.
Yeah.
We love you guys, so thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Now one more song, babe. No, I'm just kidding.